Today we're talking about one of the biggest financial topics that people struggle with. Is it better to buy or rent? There's a lot of back and forth and fighting about this on YouTube. Some people believe that renting is just throwing money away, and others believe that buying a house keeps you stuck. This is something that I've personally experienced from both sides. I've owned an apartment in New York City, and I've also rented a bunch of apartments in New York City. So I've learned firsthand how the math and the trade-offs actually play out in real life. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through a simple framework to compare buying versus renting. I'm gonna show you the true costs of each and help you figure out which one actually makes more sense for your particular situation. So before you sign a new lease or take out a mortgage, let's break down how to think about this the right way. Let's start with the most common thing that we hear about renting. You've probably heard the saying that renting is just throwing money down the drain. And on the surface, that might actually seem correct. If your rent is $3,000 a month, that's $36,000 a year that goes directly to your landlord, and you'll never see that money again. That money is in effect down the drain. And because of that, people often assume that buying a house is automatically the smarter financial decision. But here's why that idea is an oversimplification. Once you start to understand how mortgages actually work, that idea starts to fall apart. Because when you own a home, not all of your mortgage payments goes towards building your wealth. In fact, most of the money that you put towards your mortgage payments, especially early on, is also money that you'll never see again. Here's how mortgage payments actually work. Every mortgage payment is made up of two parts. The first is principal. Principal is the portion of your mortgage payment that goes towards paying down the loan balance. This is the part that actually builds equity in your home. The second part is interest. Interest is the fee that the bank charges you in order to borrow the money. And this is where the numbers get really interesting. Let's walk through a simple example. So let's say you buy a $500,000 home. You put 20% down, which is $100,000. That means that you're taking out a mortgage for the remaining $400,000. Let's say you get a 30-year mortgage on a 6% interest rate, which is pretty typical right now. So on that loan, your monthly mortgage payment will be around $2,400 per month. Over the life of that 30-year mortgage, you don't just pay back the $400,000 that you borrowed. You actually end up paying $463,000 to the bank. And again, that's just interest. That means that the total amount that you're gonna pay over the course of 30 years is closer to $863,000. And again, almost half of that money is just interest. That's money that goes directly to the bank that you'll never see again. Down the drain. And the earlier years within that mortgage are even crazier. So going back to our example, the monthly mortgage payments are $2,400 per month. So that's $28,800 per year, but let's round it down to $28,000 a year just for the sake of this example. So in the first year of the mortgage, roughly $23,000 of those payments will be going towards interest, and only about $5,000 will go towards actually paying down the loan. This shows that majority of your payment isn't building any equity at all. It's simply paying the bank the cost of borrowing money with them. So instead of paying rent to a landlord, you're paying interest to a bank. Your bank is essentially your landlord for the first several years of that mortgage. And all of that interest is money that you'll never get back. Now, this doesn't mean that buying a home is a bad financial decision, but it does show that the idea that rent is just throwing money away and that buying a home is building wealth is really just an oversimplification. Because in both situations, there's thousands of dollars leaving your bank account every single month that you'll never get back. So when it comes to choosing between buying and renting, the real question is this: how much money goes down the drain in each scenario? You're gonna have to do some math and calculate the dead money in each scenario, and I'm gonna walk you through exactly how to do that later on in the video. Once you start looking at your housing decisions this way, renting and buying become much more comparable than people realize. So now that we understand how mortgages actually work, the next question becomes, how do we compare renting versus buying the right way? There are two steps for this. Let's go over step one. The mistake most people make is comparing the wrong numbers. Most people would look at the rent price and compare that to the mortgage payment. But that comparison is misleading, because a mortgage payment is not the true cost of owning a home. It's just one part of it. When you own a home, there's several other costs that renters don't really have to deal with. Things like property taxes, maintenance and repairs, home insurance, and also the opportunity cost of the money that's tied up in the home. Some of these costs definitely build wealth over time, but a lot of them are just expenses. So the only way to make a fair comparison between renting and buying is to convert home ownership into a monthly cost. Once we do that, you can easily compare renting versus buying. But if the true monthly cost of owning a home is higher than renting, then renting might be the smarter decision. Let's go on to step two. The other important step here is we have to compare similar lifestyle. You can't just compare similar rent prices and similar home ownership costs, because oftentimes the house or the apartment that you would be getting for the similar costs are actually completely different. So for example, you might hear someone say something like, my rent is $3,000 a month And a mortgage on a house could also be $3,000 a month, so I might as well buy. But that comparison is a mistake that completely ignores reality. Let's go back to our example from before. Imagine there's a home worth $500,000. If you were to buy that home and put 20% down, that means you're borrowing $400,000. At a 6% rate, that means that your monthly mortgage payment will be around $2,400. On a $500,000 loan, let's say property taxes are around 1% of that, so that's $5,000 a year, or you could look at it as $420 per month. Then you have maintenance. Financial experts and planners online often recommend setting aside 1% of the home's value every single year for maintenance and repairs. So that's another $5,000 a year, or you can look at it as another $420 per month. So now let's add those numbers together. Your mortgage payment is around $2,400 per month, your maintenance costs are around $420 per month, and your property taxes are also around $420 per month. That brings the total monthly cost of owning that home to around $3,240 per month. Let's say you see that the exact same home or a similar home could be rented for $2,700 to $3,000 a month. In that situation, renting the home might actually be hundreds of dollars cheaper than owning it. And that's before we factor in the opportunity cost of the $100,000 down payment. The key is making sure that you're comparing the cost of renting the home to the cost of buying the exact same home. And once you're able to line those two numbers up side by side, the financial decision becomes much clearer. So just to recap, how do you compare buying and renting the right way? Step 1, you have to calculate the monthly cost of owning the home. Step 2, you have to compare the cost of renting that home to the cost of owning that same exact home. We touched on it a little bit, but now let's dive deeper into what actually makes up the true cost of owning a home. Aside from the mortgage payment that we already talked about, there are 3 costs that homeowners face that renters usually don't. The first one is property taxes, the second one is maintenance, and the third one is called cost of capital, which is actually the most important one. Let's break each of these down. If you own property, you owe taxes to the local government every single year based on the value of your home. Obviously, the rates are different from state to state or city to city, so you're gonna have to look up your local tax code and apply those tax rates to your calculations. So for the sake of this video, I'm gonna keep it general and just use the averages. In the United States, the average property tax rate is a little over 1% of the home's value every single year. So if you bought a $500,000 home, that's around $5,000 per year in property taxes. This equates to a little over $400 per month. And again, don't come for me in the comments. These are just the United States averages. Obviously, in big cities like New York, the property tax rate is going to be much higher, but for the sake of this video, I'm using the averages. So the money that you spend every year in property taxes is money that's gone forever. You're not building equity here, you're just paying the government for the privilege of owning the property. The second cost is maintenance. We all know that homes constantly need repairs. Things like your roof starts to wear out, or pipes start to leak, or appliances start to break. Because of this, a lot of the budgeting and finance experts on YouTube and other places online, they recommend setting aside 1% of the home's value every year for maintenance and repairs. So again, if we use the $500,000 home example, that's another $5,000 per year, or $400 per month, that we're gonna have to spend on maintenance and repairs. Now, the third cost is the one that most people misunderstand. It's called cost of capital, and it includes 2 parts. First is the interest that you pay on your mortgage. We went into this before, so I won't repeat myself too much. You know that when you borrow money to buy a house, the bank charges you interest for that loan. Mortgage rates are around 6 to 7% right now. 6-7. I can't believe I just said 6-7. And a big portion of your early mortgage payments goes directly to your interest, not your principal. This is simply the cost of borrowing money, and there's not really any way around it. The second part of cost of capital is called opportunity cost. If you put a $100,000 down payment on a $500,000 home, that's $100,000 that could have been invested elsewhere. It could have been invested in anything, things like stocks, index funds, or rental properties that provide cash flow. So clearly that $100,000 down payment has a cost associated with it as well. I already know this is gonna ruffle some feathers, so you can come at me in the comments if you want, but this idea of opportunity cost completely shatters the narrative that buying a home is a good investment. Because when you compare investing $100,000 into the down payment of your home versus investing $100,000 into stocks or index funds or rental properties, it's pretty obvious which one's gonna have a better ROI or return on investment. Now, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy a home. Like I said, I've owned an apartment before, and I actually like the idea of owning another one in the future. It just means that you can't look at buying a home as an investment. I know it's hard, but you kind of have to be honest with yourself, because if you were really looking at it from an investment standpoint, you would really be asking the question, okay, where can I put my money to ensure that I get the best returns over time? And when you do the math, buying a home for your primary residence, not a rental property or anything like that, Buying a home as your primary residence really isn't the best place to get an ROI. You would be better off putting it in pretty much any other safe investment, like the stock market, index funds, rental properties, that type of stuff. Now that I've pissed everybody off, let's talk about opportunity cost a little more. It's one of the most important concepts in this whole debate. Opportunity cost simply means that if you use your money for one thing, you can't use it on something else. It highlights that every financial decision has a trade-off. So when you're buying a home, usually the biggest opportunity cost comes from the down payment. Back to our example, 20% down on a $500,000 home is a $100,000 down payment that you're paying upfront. Now that $100,000 isn't gone, it got converted into home equity, which is a really good thing. But it's also no longer invested somewhere else. And this is where the whole debate comes in to whether buying a home is a good investment or not. So to answer this question fairly, you need to compare it to other investments. Let's compare it to the stock market because that's the most common investment for most people. Historically, the stock market, specifically the S&P 500, has returned 7% every year after inflation for a long period of time. Residential real estate in the US, on average, has returned around 2% every year after inflation. If those long-term averages hold, that means that the stock market, historically at least, has outperformed housing by 5%. Now, of course, this isn't guaranteed. The stock market is constantly changing and evolving, and depending on the time period that you're in, it can actually be pretty volatile. And real estate markets are different in every state and every city. But the concept still holds true. Because if that $100,000 down payment was invested in something else, like in this case, the stock market, the returns that you would get over time would be way more. Now, I'm not trying to start an argument here. The only point that I want you to take away from this is that every time you spend money, there is an opportunity cost. And so I want you to start to think about the opportunity cost every time you spend money, not just in housing. There's an opportunity cost every time you buy a new phone, every time you buy clothes, every little purchase that you make on Amazon, there's an opportunity cost associated with it. Back to renting versus buying, I want this to be clear. This doesn't mean that renting is automatically better than buying a home. Renting also has a lot of opportunity costs associated with it. And owning a home has a lot of benefits too. Owning a home provides stability, both mental stability, which is important, but also financial stability because you know exactly how much your mortgage payment is gonna be every single month. Because if you're renting, your landlord could theoretically jack up your rent every single time you need to sign a new lease, and living that way is pretty stressful. Buying a home gives you equity in real estate, which we talked about before. Now, if you're able to pay off the mortgage quickly, or if you can afford to buy the home without having to take out a mortgage, that equity is really valuable. So for me personally, I'm a middle-class guy living in New York City, and so buying a home in full without a mortgage is not really an option for me or most of the people that I interact with day to day. But obviously it's a great option if you can afford it. So now let's combine everything that we've talked about into a simple framework that you can actually use. So to be clear, this framework helps you decide whether buying or renting is best for your particular situation. To make a fair comparison, we need to convert both options into monthly costs. Let's start with rent. Rent is pretty simple. It's really just the rent price plus any little costs like having renter's insurance, for example. Next is owning a home. To calculate the monthly cost of owning a home, there are 4 costs that you want to include. 1 is your mortgage payment, 2 are property taxes, 3 is maintenance and repairs, and 4 is cost of capital. For property taxes, you can look up your state-specific or city-specific tax rate. If you want a general number for the sake of this exercise, you can use a property tax rate of 1.3% of the home's value every year. For maintenance, I suggest budgeting another 1.3% of the home's value every year for maintenance and repairs. For cost of capital, this includes 2 things. This is the opportunity cost on your down payment and the interest on your mortgage. For this exercise, I suggest using 7% of the home's value per year. All these percentages are based on US averages. Now, I added a little bit extra to the percentages just because I like to overestimate these type of things, but that's just me. So when you combine those 3 numbers, you end up with something around 9 to 10% of the home's value per year. So the final formula for calculating the monthly cost of owning a home is this. Take the price of the home, multiply it by 9 to 10%, then divide that number by 12 months. Finally, add your monthly mortgage payment to this number. That gives you a rough estimate of the monthly cost of ownership. Now you can fairly compare your monthly renting costs versus your monthly home ownership costs. Now, disclaimer, of course this is a simplified rule. It doesn't take into account the thousands of nuances that go into this. Real life is always more complicated and the numbers might be a little different. Mortgage rates are constantly changing and tax rates might be different depending on where you are. But the point is, this framework gives you a quick and simple way to compare renting versus buying using real numbers and not false narratives or guessing. You might want to learn more about how to invest your money to build long-term wealth. Watch this video where I talk about the big shift that's happening in the economy right now and how to invest your money to guarantee that you end up on the right side of it.